Welcome to Roma's Book Previews. Please like, comment and subscribe. This is a story of Renee. You might find yourself in this situation or you know someone who has. What would you do? Renee had always lived in the margins of other people's stories. Her mother had been the maid of the Holloway family for as long as Renee could remember, moving quietly through the halls of their grand home, dusting memories that didn't belong to her, polishing silverware that never set her own table. When her mother died during Renee's final year of high school, it was the Holloways who took her in. They said she could stay as long as she needed. What they meant was, she could take her mother's place. So, Renee did. She stayed in the small room at the back of the house, the one that smelled faintly of lemon oil and worn linen. She woke before dawn, made breakfast for the family, and ironed the children's clothes. The family's 4 children grew up around her, but not with her. The eldest, Robert, was already in college when she moved into the maid's quarters. He would come home on holidays, tall and self-assured, trailing the scent of textbooks and ambition. He spoke to her politely, but with the absent-minded tone one reserves for someone who blends into the background. The twins, loud, mischievous third graders, didn't bother learning her name. And Grace, the 8th grader, barely looked up from her phone long enough to notice anyone at all. Renee existed like the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer, constant, necessary, but unheard. Robert was in his 3rd year of college, buried in exams and papers, when the call came. A car accident, sudden, brutal, senseless. His parents had been on their way back from a charity gala on the outskirts of the city. The driver said there had been black ice on the curve, headlights, a flash, then nothing. Renee remembered the silence that settled over the house when the news arrived. The twins didn't understand at first. Grace did, but she refused to cry, clutching her phone like a lifeline. And Renee, who had spent years blending into the rhythm of the Holloway household, suddenly found herself at its center. She organized meals, made calls to relatives, pressed clothes for the funeral. When Robert returned home, pale and hollow-eyed, she was the one who met him at the door. He didn't say much, only nodded once, but his shoulders sagged when she quietly took his coat and said, "I'll handle things." Renee remembered the way the silence swallowed the house after the accident. For days, the clocks ticked too loudly. The twins whispered when they used to shout. Grace refused to leave her room. At the funeral, Renee stood toward the back, her hands clasped together, her black dress borrowed from one of Mrs. Holloway's old ones. Robert stood at the front with his siblings, his expression carved from something hard and exhausted. He looked too young to bear that kind of grief, and yet somehow, he did. When it was over, everyone went home. And when the last casserole dish from the neighbors was returned and the last condolence letter had been read, reality set in. Robert sat at the kitchen table one humid afternoon, his tie loosened, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up. Papers were spread out in front of him, bills, insurance forms, college correspondence. Renee hovered near the counter, pretending to wipe it down though it was already spotless. "I don't know what to do," he finally said, his voice raw from too many sleepless nights. She froze, cloth in hand. "About what?" He looked up at her, eyes bloodshot but steady. "About them." He nodded toward the stairs, where faint laughter from the twins floated down the hall. "I can't stay here, not with classes. My program's in another state. If I leave, who looks after them? Grace is still just a kid. The twins, God, they can barely brush their teeth without setting the bathroom on fire." Renee hesitated, unsure if he was truly asking her or just speaking to the air. He rubbed a hand over his face. "I've got 1 year left, Renee. 1. If I mess this up, I lose everything I've worked for. The architecture firm I want, they only take the top graduates. I can't," his voice cracked. "I can't throw that away. But I can't abandon them either." She said nothing at first, only folded the cleaning cloth and placed it on the counter. Then softly, she said, "You won't be abandoning them. They just need someone to keep things together for a while." He looked up, studying her, the girl who had quietly taken over every detail his mother once managed. She was only 18, still slight, her dark hair pulled back neatly, her hands calloused from years of work. She had been invisible for so long, yet somehow she was the only one holding the Holloway family upright. "You mean you?" he asked, not quite believing it. She shrugged, as if the thought had just occurred to her. "I can manage the house. The kids know me. I can make sure they eat, get to school, stay out of trouble. You can focus on finishing." Robert leaned back in his chair, torn between relief and guilt. "You shouldn't have to do that. You're barely older than Grace." "I know," Renee said quietly. "But someone has to." He stared at her for a long moment, the weight of his decision pressing down like summer heat. He wanted to say it wasn't fair, that she deserved more than to spend her youth raising someone else's siblings. But in that moment, practicality won over idealism. It had to. Just for a year, he murmured, more to himself than to her. One more year. I'll finish, get the job, come back. Then we'll figure things out. Renee nodded, though she wasn't sure what things meant. When he left a week later for school, the twins cried, Grace retreated into silence, and the house felt emptier than before. But Renee stayed. She woke early, cooked, cleaned, helped with homework, comforted nightmares, managed bills, all without complaint. And somewhere, in another state, Robert tried to bury the ache of guilt beneath blueprints and deadlines, telling himself that the girl he left behind was strong enough to handle it. He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't right either. A year passed like slow-moving sunlight through dusty curtains. Renee learned to manage the Holloway household as if she'd been born to do it. She woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, ironed Grace's uniform, and packed lunches for the twins, who were growing taller, louder, and more mischievous by the day. She learned which bills were due when, how to soothe Grace through her quiet grief, and how to discipline two boys who had decided that sadness was best hidden behind mischief. At night, when the house finally went still, she sat alone at the kitchen table, filling out grocery lists in her neat handwriting, the silence her only company. Letters came from Robert now and then, brief, polite, efficient. Updates about his final project, about deadlines, about how things were almost over. Each one ended with the same line, I'll be home soon. She didn't realize how much she had started to depend on those words until the day they stopped. It was early summer when he finally returned, a little thinner, a little older, his face half hidden beneath a tired smile. The sound of the front door opening startled the twins, who were in the middle of turning the living room into a fort. Grace froze on the stairs, her phone forgotten in her hand. And Renee, standing in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel draped over her shoulder, caught her breath. For a moment, no one moved. Then the twins shouted his name, crashing into him with the full force of a year's worth of missing their big brother. Grace followed, slower, quieter, but when she finally hugged him, she didn't let go for a long time. Renee stayed where she was, watching, until Robert's eyes lifted and found hers across the room. There was a flicker of something unspoken there, recognition, gratitude, guilt, and something else neither of them dared name. Hi, he said, a little breathless, still holding onto one of the twins. Welcome home, she replied softly. Later that night, when the house had quieted again, they found themselves alone in the kitchen, as they so often would. He was sitting at the table, nursing a cup of coffee. She was drying dishes. The lamplight turned everything gold and gentle. I don't know how you did it, he said quietly. The house, the kids. Everything looks better, calmer. Renee smiled faintly. It wasn't always calm, but they're good kids. They just needed time. He leaned back, studying her. There was something different about her now. The uncertainty she'd carried before was gone. In its place was quiet confidence, the kind that comes from surviving what others couldn't. You look different too, he said before he could stop himself. She blinked, a small laugh slipping out. Different good or different bad? Different strong, he said. She turned away quickly, setting a plate back into the cupboard so he wouldn't see her smile. Over the next few weeks, the house began to feel like a home again. Robert helped where he could, fixing things, tutoring Grace, taking the twins out to the park. But every time he found himself stuck, Renee was there, calm, steady, unflinching. It wasn't long before the lines between duty and something deeper began to blur. Sometimes they'd talk late into the night after the children had gone to bed, about the future, about his plans to apply for the architecture firm, about what she wanted to do once the twins were older. But whenever she said, I haven't really thought about it, he would look at her a little too long, as if he wanted to say something and didn't know how. And she pretended not to notice. Because both of them knew that the fragile peace they'd built rested on borrowed time. He was almost free, ready to step into the life he'd worked for. And she, as always, was the one who made it possible. That summer carried a softness the house hadn't known in years. The air hung heavy with honeysuckle and the sound of the twins' laughter echoing through open windows. Grace had begun to smile again, just a little, and Robert spent long afternoons sketching plans at the dining table, his pencils rolling across papers filled with angles and light. And somewhere in the middle of that easy rhythm, Renee became part of the quiet heartbeat of the home. She still rose early, still cooked and cleaned, but the way Robert saw her changed. It wasn't the invisible presence she had once been, it was something steadier, more significant. When he passed her in the hallway, he noticed the way her hair caught the sunlight. When they spoke, he listened, really listened. Sometimes, after dinner, they'd sit outside on the back porch while the twins chased fireflies across the yard. Robert would talk about buildings, about design, symmetry, the way space could shape emotion. Renee, who had never been asked her opinion on anything beyond laundry or meals, found herself speaking about light and color and how a home felt. He was surprised by her insight. She was surprised by his laughter when she disagreed with him. The tension between them wasn't sudden, it grew like ivy, climbing quietly through the cracks of their daily routine. A glance held too long, a touch that lingered when she handed him a cup of coffee, the sound of his voice softening when he said her name. Neither of them spoke of it. They didn't have to. One evening, after the twins had gone to bed, Robert placed an envelope on the table in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, wiping her hands on a towel. "Open it." Inside was a check, more money than she had ever seen in her life. Her breath caught. "Robert, I can't take this." "You will," he said firmly. "It's not charity. It's payment. For everything you've done. You kept this family together when I couldn't. You've done more than anyone had the right to ask of you." She tried to hand it back, but he pushed her hand gently away. "You earned it, Renee." His voice softened. "You gave up a year of your life for us." Her throat tightened. "It wasn't about money." "I know," he said. "That's why you deserve it." That night, when he left the kitchen, Renee sat staring at the check for a long time. It wasn't just the number that stunned her, it was what it represented. Recognition, gratitude, worth. Later that week, she used part of the money to buy a laptop, the first thing she'd ever bought for herself. She didn't tell Robert. Late at night, after everyone had gone to bed, she sat at the kitchen table taking online college courses, basic classes in business and design. Her hands trembled every time she clicked submit. It wasn't just about learning. It was about hope. By mid-August, the future had begun to press in around them. Robert had been offered a position with a prestigious architectural firm in another city, a dream job, the one he'd worked toward since college. It was everything he wanted, and yet, when he looked around the Holloway house, he couldn't help but feel the weight of what he'd be leaving behind. One evening, he told her his plan. "I'm selling the house," he said quietly. "We'll move before the school year starts. The twins, Grace, they'll come with me. I've already found a place near the city. Smaller, but close to good schools." Renee's hand stilled over the dish she was washing. "That's wonderful. You deserve it." He hesitated. "I'll need help, at least at first. Getting them settled, keeping things running until I can find proper childcare." His eyes met hers. "Would you come with us, Renee? Just for a while. Help us transition?" She turned, searching his face, trying to read the space between practicality and something deeper. "I don't want you to feel obligated," he added quickly. "You've done enough already. But the kids, they'd miss you. And I would too," hung silently in the air, though he didn't say it. Renee smiled faintly, masking the stir of emotions beneath practiced composure. "If you need me, I'll come." For the rest of the evening, neither spoke much. The hum of the dishwasher filled the silence between them, gentle and persistent, like the rhythm of two hearts waiting for something neither dared to name. The move happened in late August, under a sky heavy with heat and the smell of cut grass. Boxes lined the hallways of the Holloway home, years of memories packed into cardboard and tape. The twins ran from room to room, turning nostalgia into a game, while Grace lingered on the staircase, her face caught somewhere between relief and grief. Renee moved quietly through the house, folding the last of the linens, wiping down the counters one final time. She didn't allow herself to feel anything until the door closed behind them for the last time. The drive to the city was long. The twins fell asleep in the backseat, Grace had her headphones in, and Robert kept his eyes on the road. Every now and then, he'd glance in the rearview mirror, catching glimpses of Renee in the passenger seat. The way her hair moved in the wind, the calmness she carried even when everything around her was changing. They arrived just before sunset. The new house was smaller, modern, with clean lines and wide windows that caught the last gold light of day. The air smelled new, untouched. Robert stood in the doorway with the keys in his hand, staring at the empty rooms. "It doesn't feel like home yet," he murmured. "It will," Renee said softly, stepping past him. "It just needs a little life." And so, she set about giving it one. In the weeks that followed, Renee turned the house into something warm. She unpacked boxes, filled the kitchen with familiar smells, arranged the children's rooms so they felt safe again. Robert threw himself into his new job, working long hours, but he came home every night, and every night, she was there. The distance between them shrank. Sometimes they'd cross paths in the kitchen after midnight, he, still in his shirt and tie, weary but wired from design deadlines, she, finishing dishes or folding laundry. They'd talk in low voices so as not to wake the children. He told her about the firm, the pressure, the politics, the thrill of seeing his work come alive. She told him, hesitantly, about her online classes, about her plans to finish a degree, maybe start her own small business one day. He looked at her with something close to pride. "You're incredible, Renee." "No," she said, looking down. "Just trying to be better." "You already are." The words stayed with her for days. Autumn came quickly. The city was colder, busier, lonelier. Yet in the small apartment, life felt full. The twins flourished, Grace began to smile again, and Renee's laughter, rare and quiet, started to echo in unexpected corners. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Robert found her outside on the small balcony, a cup of tea in her hands, the city glittering below. "You should rest," she said without turning. He leaned against the railing beside her. "I can't. My head's still at the office." She smiled faintly. "You're doing great, you know. They're proud of you." He looked at her then, really looked. The glow from the streetlights softened her face, and for a moment, she wasn't the maid or the caretaker or the girl left behind. She was simply Renee, the one constant in his life. "Renee?" She turned toward him. "Yes?" The distance between them disappeared before either could think better of it. His hand found her cheek, tentative but certain, and when she didn't pull away, he kissed her, softly at first, as if testing the truth of what had been unspoken for years. It wasn't a desperate kiss, it was the kind that felt inevitable, quiet and aching, built on years of shared silences and almosts. When they finally pulled apart, the night air trembled with everything neither dared to say. "I shouldn't have," he began, guilt and longing tangled in his voice. "Don't," she whispered. "Please." He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. "I can't promise much right now. The job, the kids, everything's so uncertain. But when things settle, when I finally have something stable, I'll come for you. Properly." Renee smiled, small and sad, because she wanted to believe him. "Then promise me one thing. Anything. Don't forget me when everything's perfect." He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "Renee, you're the only part of it that feels real." The city lights shimmered around them, but the world felt still, suspended in that fragile moment between hope and heartbreak. And when he left for work the next morning, neither spoke of the kiss again. But something had shifted, quietly, irrevocably, like the first crack in the surface of calm water. Winter settled over the city like a long exhale. Robert's new job consumed him. The hours stretched into nights, the deadlines multiplied, and the pressure to prove himself became relentless. His firm had landed a major contract, a landmark project that could define his career. It demanded all of him, his creativity, his focus, his time. He tried to keep his promise, in the beginning. There were moments, fleeting ones, when he'd look up from a set of blueprints and think of her. The way she used to hum while washing dishes, the warmth she brought into every cold space. He'd send her a message, "Don't wait up. Just a few more weeks, and things will ease up." But the weeks bled into months. At home, Renee carried on as she always did, quietly, efficiently, invisibly. She helped the twins adjust to their new school, guided Grace through her moods and her homework, and made sure the house never fell apart. But in the quiet hours, she found herself alone more often than not. She filled the silence with her studies. Her laptop became her lifeline, pages of coursework, late-night lectures, dreams she'd never dared to name before. She would sit at the small kitchen table long after midnight, eyes heavy, the soft glow of the screen lighting her face. Sometimes she wondered if Robert noticed how she was changing. Sometimes she knew he didn't. When spring came, he started traveling, first for a week, then 2, then entire months. The children would ask when he was coming home. Renee never knew what to say. She'd smile and say, "Soon," even when she wasn't sure it was true. Then, one afternoon, he came back unexpectedly, looking exhausted but triumphant. He'd been promoted, offered a permanent leadership role on a new project overseas. The opportunity he had worked for his entire life had finally come. They stood in the kitchen, the same place every truth between them had been born. "I wanted to tell you first," he said quietly. "It's in London. It's everything I ever wanted, Renee." Her heart sank, though her smile didn't falter. "That's incredible, Robert. You deserve it." He looked at her, something uncertain flickering in his expression. "I'll be gone for a while. Maybe a year or 2. I'll bring the kids once things are settled." But, he stopped. "But what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't ask you to wait, he said. It wouldn't be fair. Renee swallowed hard, the words like a stone in her chest. You already did. He stepped closer, as if trying to close the distance between what they'd said and what they'd meant. Renee, don't, she interrupted softly. Don't make promises you can't keep again. The ache in her voice silenced him. He reached for her hand, but she didn't move. They stood there, suspended in the same kind of stillness that had once felt safe, now heavy with what was ending. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. I'll make sure you're taken care of. You and the kids. You've done more for us than anyone ever could. She forced a smile. I never did it for that. He nodded, and in his eyes, she saw it. The war between gratitude and regret. That night, when the children were asleep, she sat on the balcony again, staring out at the skyline. The city lights blurred into streaks, like tears refusing to fall. He left the next week. In the months that followed, the house felt emptier than ever. Robert called often at first, short check-ins, quick updates about the project, the weather, the children. But slowly, the calls grew shorter, less frequent, and though Renee never said it aloud, she understood what silence meant. She poured herself into her studies, into the children, into becoming someone her mother might have been proud of. By the time she finished her online degree, she had begun saving quietly, a little each month, enough to start something of her own. Still, some nights, she'd sit on that same balcony, the city moving around her, and remember his words, "You're the only part of it that feels real." She didn't know if he still believed it. But she did. 5 years passed before Robert Holloway came home. The city had changed. The house, his house, was no longer the one they had shared. He had sold it before moving abroad, buying a quiet place on the edge of town when he returned. The firm had done well under his leadership. His name was known in magazines, on project plaques, in conversations that mattered. He came back with everything he had once wanted. Almost everything. At his side was Claire Whitman, elegant, confident, the daughter of a well-known developer. She carried herself with the poise of someone who had always belonged in rooms Robert used to only dream of entering. She fit perfectly beside him. Renee heard of his return before she saw him. The twins, now in their final year of high school, had mentioned it casually one afternoon. Grace was in college already, studying design, and visited home on weekends. He's coming next week, Grace said, stirring sugar into her coffee. He's bringing someone. Renee only nodded, her expression unreadable. She was no longer the girl who had once stood in the shadows of other people's lives. She had finished her degree, started a small interior consulting business, and even managed to rent a small studio of her own. Still, when she heard his name, something inside her went still. They met again in early spring. The twins had begged her to come to dinner, your family, they insisted, and she hadn't been able to say no. The restaurant was all glass and gold, the kind of place where waiters spoke softly and the air smelled faintly of lemon and wine. She arrived early, as she always did, and found herself staring at her reflection in the window. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pinned neatly back. She looked composed, older, but there was still that quiet kindness in her eyes, the one no mirror could age away. Then she heard his voice. Renee. When she turned, she almost didn't recognize him. The boy she had once known was gone. This Robert carried the calm, assured confidence of a man who had learned to live in glass towers. His hair was shorter, streaked faintly with gray, his eyes still the same, but steadier. And then there was Claire beside him, radiant and poised, her arm slipped naturally through his. It's been so long, he said, smiling, warm, polite, distant. Yes, Renee said softly. It has. Dinner was pleasant, in that practiced, careful way that old memories make things complicated. The twins chatted, Grace teased Robert about his cooking, and Claire charmed everyone with easy laughter. Renee listened more than she spoke, as she always had. But every now and then, she'd catch Robert's gaze lingering across the table, quick, uncertain, as if trying to read what had become of the life he'd once left behind. When dessert came, Claire excused herself to take a call. The twins left to say hello to an old friend at another table. For the first time in years, Renee and Robert were alone. You look good, he said quietly. So do you. You've done well for yourself, he continued, his eyes softening. Grace told me about your business. I always knew you'd make something of yourself. Renee smiled faintly. You didn't know that. You just hoped. He laughed, low and wistful. You're right. I hoped. A small silence stretched between them, comfortable but heavy. I'm getting married, he said finally. I heard. He nodded, his gaze dropping to his hands. She's good for me. Stable. Kind. She seems lovely, Renee said, and she meant it. He looked up then, searching her face for something, maybe resentment, maybe forgiveness, but found only calm. Do you ever think about that night? He asked softly. She didn't flinch. Every now and then. And if things had been different? Renee smiled, a little sadly. Things were different, Robert. You just didn't stay long enough to see it. He exhaled slowly, the weight of unspoken years pressing between them. I never forgot you, he said. I know, she whispered. But remembering isn't the same as staying. When the dinner ended, he offered her a ride home. She declined politely, walking instead through the cool night air, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. The city glowed around her, bright, alive, full of noise and promise. For the first time, she didn't feel small within it. She had spent years learning how to live without being someone's background. How to build something of her own. And though part of her heart still carried the memory of a summer kiss and a promise made under a fading skyline, she knew this truth now. Some loves are meant to change you, not keep you. After that dinner, life went on, as it always does. Robert returned to the city with Claire, and wedding plans soon filled his days. He traveled again for work, this time not alone but with a partner who shared his world of deadlines and boardrooms. On the surface, everything was exactly as he had once dreamed, success, recognition, a future mapped with certainty. And yet, late at night, when the world slowed, he sometimes thought of Renee. He'd remember her in fragments, the sound of her laugh on a quiet summer night, the smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen, the way her eyes softened whenever she looked at his siblings. Those memories came not like regret, but like echoes, reminders of a gentler time, a version of himself that still knew how to feel small things deeply. Once, he drove past the neighborhood where she used to live. He told himself it was by chance, but he knew better. Her studio was tucked between a florist and a bookstore, its front window bright with light and color. A sign read R. Daniels Interiors. He parked for a long time across the street, watching her through the glass as she arranged fabric swatches and spoke to a client. She looked calm, composed, radiant in her simplicity, completely at home in her own world. He didn't go in. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't unravel what they'd both finally made peace with. So he drove away, carrying a quiet ache that wasn't sadness exactly, just the understanding that he'd once had something rare, and ordinary life had taken it away. Renee's life, meanwhile, unfolded gently. Her business grew, modest but steady. She hired 2 assistants, saved for a larger office, and began designing small spaces for local families. Sometimes Grace stopped by to help between semesters, and the twins, now preparing for college, came to her for advice more often than they did their brother. Every now and then, she'd receive a letter or a message from Robert, polite, warm, always brief. The kids are doing well. We finally broke ground on the new project. Hope you're happy. She always replied with the same grace she'd shown her whole life, I am. And she was. The ache she once carried for him had softened into gratitude for the way he had pushed her, unknowingly, to become more than the quiet girl in the maid's room. He had been a chapter she would never regret, but one that didn't need to last forever to matter. One spring morning, years later, Renee stood in her studio before the first sunlight touched the window. She was preparing a design board for a new client, a young couple buying their first home. She smiled as she laid out the colors, soft gold, pale cream, and a deep blue that reminded her faintly of his eyes. And for a brief moment, she thought of him, of the boy who had once promised her forever and the man who had taught her that love, even when it doesn't last, can still leave you whole. Outside, the city hummed with life. Renee turned off the lights, locked her studio, and stepped into the morning air. She walked slowly, her pace unhurried, her heart light. For the first time in her life, she wasn't anyone's shadow. She wasn't waiting for someone to come back. She had already arrived. Thank you for listening to this story. Watch out for part 2 of Renee's story. Please comment and let me know how you want Renee to end up. Please like and subscribe to Roma's Story Previews for more stories.